Okay, a truly remarkable episode. We're pivoting here a little bit. As everybody knows, we normally tell a story about individuals, but today we're going to tell the story of orthopedics, the history of orthopedics in America. We have Dr. Joe Zuckerman and Dr. Kenneth Egol from NYU Langone, two amazing individuals who everybody knows, but they are the executive producers of a new movie that's out specifically about the history of orthopedics. The name of the movie is called On the Shoulders of Giants, The History of NYU Langone Orthopedics. And I have to say, I was blown away. It's incredibly well produced. You might as well, it could be right on Netflix, and it is. It's on Amazon Prime, and a number of places will share that. But it's the story of so many amazing orthopedic surgeons and how the true genesis of orthopedics started, the diversity of the program. I got to tell you, if anybody that's within the orthopedic industry, this is an absolute must-listen episode and also a must-watch for the movie. Dr. Scott Sigman, hashtag follow the fro.
From Medical Media, this is The Ortho Show.
Hello, world. Dr. Scott Sigman, yes, your favorite opioid-sparing orthopedic surgeon here for another episode of the Ortho Show podcast. Everyone knows we bring the best of the best in orthopedics, and today is actually a very special episode. As everyone knows, we usually talk about our guests and their unique stories, but we're going to talk about the history of orthopedics in America. Specifically, we have two amazing guests, Dr. Joseph Zuckerman, who's the professor and chairman, Department of Orthopedics at NYU Langone Hospital in New York City, with Kenneth Egol as well, who is the professor and vice chairman of the Department of Orthopedics at NYU Langone. Gentlemen, what a pleasure it is to have you on. I'm very excited about this episode.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks very much, Scott. Nice to be here.
It's my pleasure. All right, so let's start. Let's educate everybody here because I think this is kind of neat. Both of you are the executive producers of a documentary style movie. The name of the movie is On the Shoulder of Giants, The History of NYU Langone Orthopedics. And Ken, I'm going to start with you. Why are you making a movie? Okay, you're an orthopedic surgeon. You're very busy. You know, your residency, this, that, and the other. Where was the idea to make a movie?
Well, it actually goes back a while. It goes back to COVID, when things kind of shut down for us here, outside regular orthopedics, and we had a lot of residents. We have a lot of students around, and they needed things to do. And we thought it was a good time to go back and basically write up some biographies of some of the famous people that had practiced orthopedics throughout history at our institution. And we did that over a year or two and wound up publishing about 23 of these biographies in the literature in our Bulletin of the Hospital for Joint Diseases, which is a peer-reviewed journal. And after we put that all together, I kind of always had the idea that it was the whole history was a very interesting story, and having be a person who tends to like to watch a lot of things on Netflix and these streaming services. I thought if you put it all together and made it historical fiction, it could be a very interesting Netflix series. So we bantered that around a little bit, and I knew some people who were involved in had some connections in show business, and I ran it by them, and everyone thought it was kind of an interesting idea and never went anywhere. And so it happened. I had a patient who was a documentary filmmaker who I treated many, many years ago. And I knew he was a documentary filmmaker because he had given me one of his award-winning documentaries, and I enjoyed it. And as it turned out, while all of this discussion was going on between me and Joe, he had a new injury. He had a Lisfranc injury to his foot, and he came to see me. And as I'm examining him and I'm talking to him about surgery and whatnot, I said to him, "Hey, by the way, I got this idea to make a documentary film. Is it something that interests you?" And I told him about it, and he was very interested in it. So I wound up taking care of him, and he got through everything and recovered. And basically he took it from there, and that's how it all came to be.
I love it. And you gave him a cameo in the movie too, because I know I've just watched the movie a few times, so I know. Now look, Dr. Zuckerman, I got to get something off my chest first. I want to know who was responsible for picking the residents in 1990. I know you were the chairman. You started in 1994. What was going on in 1990? Who was doing that?
1990 was the first year that I became program director.
All right, I want to thank you very much for my rejection of my application to residency at the Hospital for Joint Diseases. I thought that was the case. I love it. Fantastic. Thank you very much. No, so listen, Dr. Zuckerman, talk to us. So obviously, Ken's got this idea for the movie. It's not a small undertaking, but I gotta say, I mean, I've seen the movie. We're going to talk about it. It's unbelievable, some of the history of that was dug up by you guys about what was happening here, right?
Well, it is an impressive piece of work, and I give Ken Egol a tremendous amount of credit for everything that he did to make this happen. Yes, he came to me about this idea, and I was in supportive and enthusiastic, right? But the driving force behind this has always been Ken and his view of history. Back in 2005, we did it was the 100-year anniversary of the Hospital for Joint Disease. So we did a history book of the first 100 years. And then by that time, we had already merged since 1997 with NYU. And we saw then that there was some relationship between the Hospital for Joint Diseases and NYU or Bellevue Orthopedics. But we didn't do anything on it. But when Ken started doing these biographies, he really uncovered a robust history and basically a common origin of the founders of the Hospital for Joint Diseases with NYU or Bellevue Orthopedics. And that in and of itself was worth the price of admission just to find that out.
And I got to say, it's a highly produced, series or movie, I should say. I mean, this is not a fly-by-night thing. I mean, you clearly had the real deal here, Ken, for the people that you brought in.
Oh yeah, Peter Sanders is a professional documentarian. He's done this before. And we showed this. This was an accepted film at Tribeca Film Festival this year. So
I love it. So towards the end, we're going to let everybody know where they can watch it for sure. But before we dive into the history of it, which is fascinating, there were a few themes that really jumped out at me, and I wanted to get everybody's opinion on this. The first was the idea of diversity before diversity was even remotely a thing. Dr. Zuckerman, give us your thoughts on that, because it really is remarkable.
Well, if you look at the origins of the Hospital for Joint Diseases, its original name was the Jewish Hospital for Deformities. Because back when it was founded in 1905, although there were many hospitals in New York City, they were all kind of divided based upon religious lines, right? There was the hospital where, if you were, Protestant, you would work, or Catholic was another hospital, or Mount Sinai was a Jewish hospital. But there was one other there was an orthopedic hospital in the city then. It was a hospital for ruptured and crippled, but everybody couldn't necessarily work there. So the Frauenthal brothers, who had been trained by Louis Sayre at Bellevue, started their own hospital, the Jewish Hospital for Deformities. And basically it was a place where Jewish orthopedic surgeons could work, and when they couldn't work elsewhere. So that was the beginning of it. And you add to that the first female orthopedic surgeon, probably in the United States, was trained there, right? And that's the beginning of women in orthopedics. Probably would have been the first board certified orthopedic surgeon, but she finished her residency before board certification and unfortunately passed away, at an early age, or else she would have been exactly there. So, and that's been a theme that was carried straight forward by, particularly during the years when Ken was the program director, and how we completely diversified our residency program.
Yeah, no, and we'll talk about that because, there are some images and pictures, group pictures, and just it's amazing the diversity both in gender as well as race. It wasn't just, it sort of moved just not from Jewish, doctors, but from doctors from all over the world. We'll share that as well. So three things, again, Hospital for Joint Diseases, NYU, Langone. I know the two of you are very, big on this, and that is education, research, and patient care, right? Those are themes that are constantly discussed throughout the movie, and of course through the culture that you've developed there as well. Ken, you want to speak to that?
yeah, we practice and in a very academic environment here, and it's nothing new. It's when we went back and looked at it, it's always been that way. You look back at the way medicine was back at the turn of the century and the early part of the last century. it wasn't big academic medical centers. Everybody was an individual private practice person. And the hospital, and my sense is that all the hospitals vied to get all the private practice doctors to bring their patients to the hospitals. Well, because it's not like it is today. Any patient who needed a blood test, any patient who needed an X-ray, any patient who needed anything at all, it was all done at the hospital. And that's how the hospitals made their money, by patients coming into their hospital. And so they wanted doctors bringing their patients to the hospital. So even though all of these people were quote unquote private practitioners, individual private practice people, hung up a shingle here or wherever, they were all dedicated to advancing the field of orthopedic surgery. They were brilliant people for their time. They had thoughts and ideas about things that were way ahead of their time. If you think about it, they were really pioneers in so many different ways. One guy, Michael Berman, was doing arthroscopy in the 1930s at the hospital by looking through a cystoscope, a modified cystoscope. He was the first person to ever do that. The first bone lengthening device was developed by people and patented. All kinds of amazing, ideas, and that culture has just, been perfused throughout everything we've done throughout the decades, upon decade. So that to me was a really interesting thing to find out.
All right, let's dive into the history. All right, guys, I think it's, I watched the movie several times at this point. We're going to start off with Bellevue because that's sort of where it all started. You have Louis Albert Sayer, who becomes really arguably the first orthopedic professor, right? The first person that really decides that we're going to teach orthopedics as well. So, so Dr. Zuckerman, talks to us a little bit about Sayer and what he meant to Bellevue at the time.
Well, Sayer was the first professor of orthopedic surgery in North America. I mean, basically, probably the Western Hemisphere. I mean, Europe had their early phases in development of medicine, so they were ahead of the United States. But Sayer was the beginning of it. And Sayer's career, he was involved in founding the American Orthopedic Association, wrote books on different hip procedures, right? Was very big in treating scoliosis and deformity. And Bellevue, he was a professor at Bellevue Medical College, which was the precursor of NYU School of Medicine. People would come to him to train. And who came to him to train but Henry and Herman Frauenthal, two brothers from Pennsylvania who wanted to become orthopedic surgeons.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, who would even, it wasn't even a thing. I mean, orthopedic surgeons back at that day, was crazy. It was more general surgeons that were doing everything, right? So the concept and idea of even having orthopedic surgeons as a specialty. But so then again, you brought it up. I mean, there was a need, for a Jewish hospital because, Jews had to go somewhere and the doctors that were Jewish needed to be able to go somewhere. And so they open up this hospital, it starts growing. And, I really love it. I mean, one of the things that really comes out is the early concept of free orthopedic care for those that couldn't afford care, right? I mean, from early on, that was a message and a passion that was developed there. You want to speak to that, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, that actually came from Sayer. Sayer passed that down to Henry Frauenthal, and the building of the hospital was basically the completion of a promise from what I've read that he made. And how do we know that? Because when Henry Frauenthal died and passed away, Louis Albert Sayer's son, Reggie Sayer, spoke at the memorial and mentioned this relationship and what it was. And basically the hospital was built to, not for the reasons you mentioned, but also to provide care for a lot of these unfortunate children in the city who were neglected. And nobody was ever turned away because they couldn't pay. As I mentioned earlier, all the hospitals are always looking for paying patients. They're the physicians, the doctors to bring patients in. And this was kind of a different deal. You were never turned away. And they relied on a lot of philanthropy. There was a lot of philanthropy. They had a lot of connections to some wealthy people in the city. And they took care of these people. And even when Frauenthal died, he left all of his money to the hospital. Some was set aside to provide for education for physicians going forward, and we still give out that money for people doing fellowships today.
100 years later, that's amazing.
Yeah. And the rest was to be for the care of sick children. And it was expressly put in his will that would be the case.
Yeah, orthopedics for our listeners, we've said it before, orthos meaning straight and PD for children. So literally our specialty was born from straightening children, whether it was polio and the deformities that we're seeing because of disease, in the late 1800s and early 1900s as well. And so then there's Marion Frauenthal Sloan, as you brought up, Dr. Zuckerman, who's the first woman who has a published peer-reviewed paper. And come on. There are no women orthopedic surgeons in 1910, right? That had to have been really incredible to dig that up.
She was a resident here. She was also the daughter of Herman Frauenthal, right? So she had some connections to the hospital, and maybe that's one of the reasons that she was able to train after medical school. But she was a resident, but she also worked in the women's auxiliary. Right. It was a little astounding. Right. And she graduated and she was quite a phenomenon when you think about it. Right. And the other thing I want to point out is, Kenny has used the phrase that the orthopedic hospital, the hospital for joint diseases, was the family business. Right. They were all in. They had some wealthy relatives. Right. But everybody was involved. Cousins, in-laws, right? They all donated their time. They all tried to raise money. It became the family business.
Fascinating. Yeah, the Rothschilds, I know, were a part, which is where I think a lot of the money would come from. But really, really amazing. And then this whole idea of orthopedic residency, which is a little different than the word resident was because you literally lived in the hospital, yes. Right? It's a little different now than the kids that have to have a lot of extra free time compared to the training that we were doing. But that's not the point here. But the residency, the idea and the concept of being in the hospital, caring for these patients and the entire spectrum of disease, diagnosis, treatment, surgery, all of those things happening, while you're there to learn. And then that's like, on the shoulders of giants, right? These are the orthopedic surgeons that started the specialty, and then they became the next great generation that went to various places around. We'll talk about some of the great people that you've trained and where they've gone, because they're in the movie too, which I loved. And so let's just sort of dive in now a few things. Like there's so many really amazing aspects. Like, I remember my OIDI exams and having to look at the pathology and the orthopedic tumors. And you've got Henry Jaffe who comes there, who's really the godfather of orthopedic pathology as well. Just his slide collection is still amazing to this day.
Yeah, it wasn't just orthopedic surgery. It was a robust history. I said Henry Jaffe, the father of orthopedic pathology. Right. And also, we didn't even talk about the rheumatology side and the radiology side, which was all devoted to orthopedics. But there's Jaffe. Listen, when I was a resident, you learn about the Finkelstein's test. All right. OK. I had no idea where it's from. I was writing chapters about elbow injuries, talking about the Mills classification. And it's only later on, once I was here, that I realized that, these are people that are part of our history. These are
right there, living legends, literally at the hospital, creating these classifications and these tests, which we all think of today, for sure. And I love, there's some of the segments which I really enjoyed a lot. The Meshuggah young Lou Schoen, with his black hair at the time, but still crazy hair, interviewing, the foot and ankle specialist as well. And then like the concept of the idea of like, nobody can imagine Henry Mencken as like a resident, right? Or somebody in training, right? But, Henry Mencken leaves joint diseases and goes to Mass General and creates orthopedic oncology, right? It's just amazing.
Right. And when he did, he took Dick Smith with him, right, who was a hand surgeon here, Bob Leffert, right? These were all people originally from the hospital for joint diseases.
The other thing, Ken, which I found interesting was, there's so many subspecialties in orthopedics that we just take for granted now, right? Hand, knee, shoulder has become a new thing, but trauma, et cetera. And so these like amazing foot and ankle and hand surgeons like started the idea. You've got Emmanuel Kaplan, you got the crazy Russian Paul Lapidus that comes on board, and these guys are creating subspecialties in orthopedics.
Yeah, and even Mel Joss, who was founder of the American Orthopedic Foot and Ankle Society, writes the first textbook devoted to, foot and ankle. Not just a textbook, but a 4-volume textbook. I mean, there's only 2 feet, and you got 4 volumes out of it. All right.
Yeah. I mean, Luchot gets a little crazy when it comes to talking about foot and ankle. He's like, the only reason we're a species on the planet is because of the foot and ankle, so we can run away from saber-tooth tigers, right? I mean, that's some of the craziness, but we
Interesting
love
thing
it.
about Mel Joss, his father was a attending at the hospital for joint diseases before him. And the Joss maneuver, which you've heard of to reduce metacarpal fractures, that was named for his father. His father described that, not Mel Joss, the foot surgeon. His father's Samuel Joss.
Yeah, amazing. Just the history is so rich, and Dr. Milgram takes over really as the chair, right? And I find that part of the movie to be really quite fascinating because I really feel like that's when the diversity thing really goes kind of crazy. You look at all the images of the women that are in. You can see men of color from different countries. I just love the story of Jacques, Serge Parisian, again, one of the earliest arthroscopists. And again, you brought it up. Back in the day, you'd look through, the eyepiece as you're trying to go into the knee. I don't know what those urologists were thinking. They're putting it in the schmeckel and they got their faces right in front of them. Thank God the camera came around eventually, for sure. But no, I just love that story. His father, he is an orthopedic surgeon. He says, you're going to go train with Milgram at Hospital for Joint Diseases. And he does, like, no big deal.
Yeah, because Milgram accepted him, right, to come and do some training here. He wasn't a resident of the program, but he came here and he was so impressed he wanted his son to train here. And Milgram ultimately accepted his son. And Serge was the first, Black resident in our program, right? And some of the things he did was phenomenal. I mean, he probably doesn't receive enough credit for advancing the field of arthroscopy and arthroscopic surgery as he should.
Yeah, just and it just goes on and on. I mean, hip replacements, right? Sir John Charlie, he gets the idea for the cement from a dude at Hospital for Joint Diseases.
Right, right, unbelievable, right?
Yeah, I mean, Sir John Charlie gets all the credit for it, which I'm sure, he did a lot to be able to do that. But then, they come back to New York and they start doing hip replacements and knee replacements. I did 2 today. It's such a common thing, but back in the day, forget about it.
Right, absolutely. Or even Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl did the first Elizarov procedure in the United States, right? Viktor Frankl had a knack for identifying the next great wave in things. So he not only did he go to Siberia to visit Elizarov, but a few years later he brought Elizarov and his family here. Right? That's what he did. Viktor supported people. Elizarov also had he arranged for Elizarov to have his coronary bypass surgery here as well. So, I mean, Elizarov was well taken care of.
Yeah, no, so for our listeners, there's this guy, Elizarov, who's literally in Siberia, and he comes up with this thing by using bicycle parts to be able to lengthen legs and treat fractures. And so Viktor Frankl, who's the immediate, chair before you, Dr. Zuckerman, goes over and learns this technique and then brings it back to the United States. And then, Ken, you wouldn't have had a job if it wasn't for Howard Rosen, going over to Switzerland. I mean, right? In the day, all we did for people that had broken bones, we stuck them in casts, you put them in traction, they laid in bed for 8 weeks. And, the idea and concept of operating on fractures is so, it's second nature now, but in the day that wasn't happening. So tell us about Howard Rosen and what he had to do.
So Howard, is really known as the father of internal fixation here in America. And he came to it by chance. He met Maurice Mueller at a meeting at the Plaza Hotel in the 60s, showing him a case involving his uncle's humerus non-union. And he went over to Switzerland and then basically came back to the United States with all the AO instruments in his luggage, and did his first cases here. And he kept his own instruments and took his instruments with him every day and brought them back to and from the hospital. And they were sterilized, but they were his instruments that he brought over, and he was the only one who had them for a very long time. And that's how he, built his reputation as the guy to take care of all the major problems that nobody else could take care of.
So how did he get plates and screws? Would somebody be able to make it here? They have to fly him over from Switzerland. What were they doing?
At the beginning, he would travel back and forth to Switzerland and bring them in his luggage
Oh my God.
until the Synthes established themselves in America. Yeah.
I mean, that's just so phenomenal. It's the things that we take for granted today, crazy arthroscopic this and shoulder replacements and all of
Forget
the,
that. The drills, they used to drill by hand,
oh my God.
drill by a hand drill. I mean,
Wait a second. Wait a second. I used hand drills, right, during residency, right? Let's not make this like the century, right?
I could say I've been doing this for 35 years. I did not use a hand drill. Ken, did you use a hand drill?
I did not, but I used a tap.
Okay, there you go. No, I think it's absolutely fantastic. So, I mean, these are the stories that are in the movie, and it's so well produced as you sort of roll through the history. And I love you bring in some of the residents, you bring in, some of the retired guys to be able to come in, and there's people that have gone away and practiced elsewhere. And Dr. Zuckerman, you took over in 1994, and then you were able to, really see the building of the new building. Actually, the new building happened before, right? That was in like the 79, 80 or so. But then you were the steward of the merger of NYU and Hospital for Joint Diseases coming together. And tell us that it's never easy, right? To bring together egos and people and different ways of training. How difficult was that?
Well, it's interesting. And of course, you can imagine there's a lot of pitfalls along the way, but we were able to do this. I became chairman in '94 at the Hospital for Joint Diseases, and the plan then was we were at early in the merger with NYU as two institutions. And because the chair of orthopedics at NYU was Ted Waugh, who was getting ready to step down, the idea was always to have one chair. So that happened a few years later in '97. And I think the reason why we were successful in merging the two departments is because frankly, there was one guy in charge. I'm not saying that it had to be me, but you didn't have to bring two different departments together with two different chairs. So ultimately, I could get all the advice I wanted from talking to people in the department, faculty, but then by consensus or otherwise, I could make a decision about it. But we made sure we did it in an evolutionary way rather than a revolutionary way. And it took time. There's no doubt about it. But a lot of people were responsible for the success of what we were able to achieve.
Yeah, no, it's truly a remarkable story. Ken, tell our listeners and our viewers where they can watch. How are they going to watch this movie?
So it's currently streaming on a number of services. Most notably, it's on Amazon Prime, available on Amazon Prime. It's available on DirecTV, Dish, EchoStar, Tubi, Apple TV Plus, iTunes, Hoopla, In Demand, Fandango, Vudu, or Canopy.
Listen, we're so excited about it being available online, even though I have a copy of it. Once in a while, I'll actually buy it, right? So I can watch it.
Well, I bought it too on my flight home the other day to make sure that I was able to watch it for sure. Well, look, we've got a lot of listeners from around the world, so I'm hoping to get a serious blip for you guys when this comes out for sure. So Ken, I mean, look, you're an amazing actor, you're an executive producer, you're going to keep this orthopedic surgery thing as a side hustle, or you're gonna keep going for a little while?
That's right. I've been told I have to stick to my day job.
Yeah, no, I thought you guys did an amazing job. Look, I can't thank you both enough for taking the time to be able to share what is such a great passion for all of us. Orthopedic surgery is the greatest job on the planet to be able to care for patients in a way. You've trained, the two of you have trained and educated so many people. You've been able to, the things that you have done have been able to help other people that you've never met before by all of the lineage of the people that have trained, working all their way back to Dr. Sayer and to the things that you're doing. So I want to thank you both for your time today and for your ability to share an amazing story.
Well, Scott, we'd like to thank you for your appreciation about the story, right? And the fact that it resonated with you is very, very meaningful to us because we feel great about it. And the fact that we can get the word out to your listeners is even more meaningful. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Ken, as well, parting words?
Yeah, I encourage everybody who has any interest in healthcare, medicine, orthopedics, or just great human interest story to take a look. It's everyone who's seen it, even outside of medicine, has really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, we talk about ourselves at the Ortho Show as the voice of orthopedics. We're also the stewards of the history of orthopedics. So it's really been a pleasure to be able to share with both of you today across our viewership. This is Dr. Scott Sigman, hashtag follow the fro, host of the Ortho Show. Till next time.